Hello and welcome back to another episode of Dark Souls II Dissected. You might have heard about how you can get a pig to follow you all the way across one of its levels to lead it to some mushrooms to dig up a secret weapon for you. It's the weirdest and most notorious secret put into any of these games to date, but that's not the whole story. None of the demonstrations I could find on how to get the pickaxe actually show the weirdest part of this event. In fact, I'm going to show you something I've never even seen a screenshot or video of before. Plus, there's a few more pig secrets to unpack while we're at it. So allow me to cue the obligatory introduction sequence, and then we'll get right into it. So I think it's best to start with an overview of getting the pickaxe. Unless another player gifts it to you in multiplayer, the pickaxe in Dark Souls 2 is a secret weapon that can only be obtained by luring a pig all the way from the start of Brightstone Cove Tseldora down into this building to eat some mushrooms. In the process of eating the mushrooms, the pig also digs up the pickaxe for you. If you're unfamiliar with Dark Souls 2 in particular, I should point out how there's nothing to indicate that the mushrooms can be interacted with. And the idea of luring an enemy long distances is never hinted at as something that might be needed to solve a puzzle of some kind. And most players would probably assume it's not even possible, given how a lot of enemies have a relatively short leash distance, preventing them from traveling too far from their point of origin. It's easily the series' most convoluted secret, so you might be wondering how was anyone ever expected to figure this out, and how did they do it? But the thing is, it never was discovered. We only know about it because the Future Press guidebook told us about it, and it was never a mystery. Later in the video, I'll have more to say about the implementation of secrets in these games, and what I think the hunt for the pickaxe might have looked like if it was kept a secret, but I think that for most people, the mystery stops here. It was something we were simply told about, and you can find a bunch of videos of people showing you how to get the pickaxe. But the pig situation never truly felt resolved to me because of one really strange loose end. In the Future Press guidebook, it says, "There is a 1 in 1,000 chance that a special piglet will spawn in Brightstone Cove Tseldora's Royal Army campsite. If it doesn't appear, resting at the bonfire or otherwise resetting the area will give you another chance to find him. This piglet is not hostile and will follow you. If you can take him all the way to the mushrooms in the bottom of the cove, he'll eat the mushrooms and you'll get the pickaxe." So what the hell are they talking about? A rare 1 in 1,000 chance for a non-hostile pig that you need to get the pickaxe? That doesn't sound right because there's a couple of boars that are normally here by default, and both of them can dig up the pickaxe for you. Now, it's not that this factoid was completely forgotten. A few of the video guides reference it, but usually with a shrug, and can you fault them?
The real way that you have to get the weapon is that you have to lead a special pig that have a chance. I think it's a 1 in 1,000 chance to spawn. But it is possible to do it with any of the pigs that spawn there.
They say that there's a chance that there's like a 1 in 1,000 chance that a friendly pig will spawn, and that's the one that you lead all the way down. That's not true. You can do it with the hostile pig.
So it's something that comes up in conversation every now and again, but because seemingly no one ever documented it, I've always wondered if it's even real. Was the guidebook referencing something that got cut and replaced with reliably spawning pigs, so the conditions weren't too absurd? But a few years back, I got confirmation from Hot Pocket Remix that the event code is very real. The first time I ever saw any kind of confirmation that this wasn't just some outdated rumor. And tools for exploring the map data make it clear that a third pig is actually there, and it confirms its starting location and its smaller size for us. That helped eliminate most of my concerns, as part of me was worried about how you'd even recognize this rarer pig, unless you really had the precise positioning of the regular ones memorized, or if you could be certain that it was actually smaller, like the piglets from Majula. At this point, modding it into the game so that it's always here would be trivial, and for the purpose of making this video, I did do that so I could mess around with it more easily. But before modding it in, I had this uneasy feeling of sorts. What if some obscure quirk of the code made it not work? We could mod the game to give it like a 50% spawn chance and make sure the code is working, but a near superstitious worry on my behalf had me thinking about how altering the code in any way might jumpstart it into working when potentially broken otherwise. So for the purposes of being thorough, and being able to say to myself that I've actually seen this rare pig for real, I wasn't going to settle on anything less than an unmodded encounter. So I got to grinding. There's a lot of nearby enemies in Scholar of the Fursin, so I started off by grinding them out of existence, which takes 12 kills of every enemy. I wanted to be able to check for the rare pig without having a bunch of enemies bothering me. I would then run out from the bonfire and take a look to see if the third pig was in its expected location, but that was a little bit awkward because of the way the pigs wandered. So I'd spend a couple seconds taking a careful look to make sure it really wasn't there, before running back to the bonfire and trying again. This was very time consuming, and after doing this probably about 100 times with no luck, I was starting to worry about how much effort grinding out a 1 in 1,000 spawn chance would actually be. But thankfully, I was sharing this whole process with Dark Souls II modder Moonlight Ruin. He modded the spawn chance to see the pig in his game, and made a very important discovery that I'd never heard about before. When the rare pig spawns, the others despawn. You cannot see all 3 pigs at once. Equipped with this new knowledge, I realized that I no longer had to run all the way out to look for the 3rd pig. I could remain by the bonfire and just spam resting at it, looking only for the regular pigs to despawn. New pig spawning meta unlocked. And yeah, so I still spent almost a couple hours doing this. Combined with my previous slower attempts, this finally culminated in this happening in under 3 hours. Holy shit, I think I got it. Oh, there it is. There it is. Holy shit. Okay, so he does aggro against you. Oh man, that's incredible. Oh, it only took a few hours of grinding. This feels kind of like seeing a good vagrant or something. Goodbye. So, a few things to reflect on there. You could hear in my voice just how tired and drained I was at that point. It's also very funny how I just quickly fell off the cliff and died. It's not like I'm not deeply aware of the level layout of Tseldora at this point. Under any other circumstance, there's no way I'd accidentally walk backwards in the direction of the cliff. But at that point in the grind, I was basically fighting nodding off, so I'm going to chalk that up to being almost half asleep. It's a funny way to lose my first proper sighting of the rare pig, but I really just wanted to see it, so I'm happy with that. Though we did learn something new here. The information about the pig being non-hostile was incorrect. So anytime you ever read about this online, it seems like something that was never personally confirmed by anyone, just a small incorrect detail from the guidebook spreading to the community. But then I remembered, I did all of this in Scholar of the First Sin. The guidebook was made for the original, vanilla version of Dark Souls 2 after all. Maybe it wasn't hostile in that? Moonlight Ruin confirmed that there were very subtle changes to its placement and some changes to its AI between vanilla and Scholar. So maybe it used to be non-hostile. I did notice that the pigs patrolled and moved around in Scholar and not vanilla. So that possibly entirely explained their difference in AI, but now I was motivated to see the rare pig in vanilla too. This thankfully took less than an hour and a half, starting off with the new grinding meta, though it was definitely more annoying mentally because of how the bonfire used to be placed inside this tent. I didn't have to step away from the bonfire to check on the pigs, I could still spam resting at the bonfire, but I had to carefully angle the camera and watch the tent flaps sway back and forth in the world's most depressing game of peekaboo. Eventually, after resting at the bonfire over 600 times, I once again failed to see the regular pigs through the tent opening, informing me that the little guy was finally here. And no, he's not non-hostile here either. So the small pig being friendly is one minor myth we can debunk, but otherwise it's legit. The 1 in 1,000 spawn chance for a smaller pig is real.
Crazy thing is, it's true. All of it. It's all true.
Besides for the part about being friendly, huh? Okay, so now that we know it's real, I hope you didn't think we were gonna stop there. Of course there's more to talk about. Why are the pigs able to follow you so far in the first place? Let's talk about leading the pigs to the mushroom. To start with, let's consider leash distance. I have to admit to assuming that this was going to be something buried in their AI that would be harder to interrogate, but it's actually its own parameter we can easily look at. For all 3 pigs here, it's set to 200, which means they all have a radius of 200 meters they can travel from their starting location. The mushroom is roughly 78 meters away from there, meaning we have not only a long enough leash to get them down there, but to also lead them even further away in the level first in order to traverse the necessary roundabout path. This area is roughly 115 meters away from their starting location, so we have an extra 85 meters or so to spare from the furthest location you might want to take them. Learning about the leash distance parameter led me to check another assumption I had. Because it's not normal in these games to lead enemies really long distances, surely the pigs have the longest leash distance, right? But they don't. Shout out to Evan Halfgrown Hollow, another friend in the Dark Souls II modding community who dumped all of the leash distances in the game and compiled it into a spreadsheet for me. We'll find that the maximum leash distance is actually 1,000 meters, an entire kilometer. This isn't actually that interesting though, when we see that this list is occupied entirely by NPCs. When you bear in mind how they would have wanted to make some co-op summons and invaders able to follow you through an entire level, that carves out an exception where I don't feel like it even counts as the same thing as luring a normal enemy around. They just gave some NPCs an arbitrarily huge number to make sure they wouldn't have issues following. The penultimate leash distance turns out to be 500 meters, and while that's also mostly NPCs, we do have a regular enemy of sorts in here, the frozen reindeer. Of course these assholes would be able to follow you the furthest. That makes perfect sense, unfortunately. Higher than 200 still, we also have these hollows in the frigid outskirts with a leash distance of 300 meters. While humanoid, they're still being counted because they're not player character like NPCs given a huge distance for the same reason. They're given a huge distance specifically because of the level design of the frigid outskirts. Same reason the frozen reindeer can follow you super far. And continuing to descend the list from here, it's only NPCs until we get back down to a leash distance of 200 meters. Meaning that, not counting NPCs, the Tseldora Pigs have the third longest leash distance in the game. But when we bear in mind that the Frigid Outskirts was DLC, these pigs were in the highest tier of leash distance for regular enemies when the game first came out. So my initial hunch that they must have had the longest leash distance wasn't totally off base, while still being technically incorrect. I'll link to the spreadsheet in the video description if you'd like a closer look at what's in there. Now, in terms of leading the pigs all the way to the mushrooms, leash distance is still only part of the story. We also have invisible wall permissibility to consider. In my latest video on the invisible walls of Dark Souls II, I talked about how an invisible enemy wall prevents you from knocking Cromwell off of this cliff. This is the same cliff that we might want to have a pig follow us down, and because they are able to pass through it, it means the developers did have to stop to consider these potential barriers. While I don't think the system is fully understood yet, in terms of exactly which enemies will be held up by which invisible walls, this is governed by a parameter called HitFilterID, and they had to make sure the pigs weren't blocked by HitFilterID number 30, apparently. The one used to stop Cromwell and a bunch of other enemies. Lastly, we need navigation meshes to make a connecting path for the pigs to follow. Enemy AI needs what's essentially an invisible carpet of sorts that covers the ground, which tells them where they're allowed to go and will try to calculate optimal paths along the available tiles. This is something that's normally a non-concern, because unless an area is out of bounds, you can expect the entire walkable space of a level to be covered in them. For example, here's a view of Hyde's Tower of Flame with only the Navmeshes toggled into view. You'd be forgiven for thinking this is the same thing as the floor's collision, because it does have to cover all of it. They don't want you to be able to back into the corner of a room and have enemies not know how to get to you, after all. However, in order for the pigs to follow us in Tseldora, we need to consider how verticality works. For an enemy to be able to chase after you and drop off of ledges, the game needs Navmeshes for that too. And the way they do that is by connecting platforms with these invisible paths that look kind of like ladders or slides. That's not the only way to get an enemy down to a lower platform. Maybe you can bait an attack that sends them over an edge, or you can just knock them off. The lack of a Navmesh isn't a hard boundary like an invisible wall. However, if they're simply following you, then yes, the game does need a Navmesh to instruct the enemy that they're able to jump down to you. Because of this, it's standard in the Souls games to connect most adjacent vertical platforms with Navmeshes in the first place. Even without the pig escort mission implemented, I suspect that we'd probably find most of the vertical Navmeshes in Tseldora just the same. But I do wonder to what extent these were all playtested. So now I wanted to double check on what paths are actually viable or even make sense. I tried to conceive of every possible route of getting to the bottom of the level and found what looked like 13 potential paths. Now, common sense will tell you that some of these are much better than others. I also grinded enemies out of existence, with the assumption that a player wanting to try this might do the same, or at least clear out as much of a path as they can in advance to minimize the risk of accidentally killing the pig in combat. So I'm not really going to rank all of these in terms of viability or how dangerous the enemies along the way can be, but I do want to point out some of the biggest risks and shortcomings I found, and what I think the safest path is. If you jump off the cliff here, or walk down the stairs and jump down from here, you can wind up on top of this little room sticking out of the cliff's wall. If you get the pig to follow you here, the obvious correct thing to do is follow the platforms in this direction, which are connected with Navmeshes. However, I did notice that they put another Navmesh here. This is because you are expected to be able to get in here in order to get a large Titanite shard. Now, why on earth would you try luring a pig down into an incredibly narrow platform above a death pit? Surely it's the dumbest route you could conceive, and yeah, it is. But I was a little surprised to find that the pig didn't seem to know how to use this Navmesh, or at least while I was down here, I couldn't get him to follow me at all. Then I tried bailing from this area, and in one attempt, it resulted in the pig getting confused and falling into the pit, but in a second attempt, it actually found its way back down correctly, so you can kind of maybe go this way, but obviously it's a terrible idea. But now, let's back things up to on top of here again. There are two Navmeshes that should connect to this little rooftop, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get this taller one to work. The pig will go all the way around and use the shorter one, so even though this path should be viable, it isn't unless you knock the pig off. And then, the shorter one made me nervous as well, because it has a small gap. Even just walking off slowly, the player seems to be safe, and in all of my tests with the regular boars, they were able to follow me just fine. But I wondered if the smaller collision box of the small pig put it at risk for failing to cross this gap. What I didn't show earlier is that when I got the small pig to spawn legitimately in vanilla, I didn't clumsily fall off of a cliff again, and this time I made a proper effort to get it to dig up the pickaxe. But I knew I wanted to double check this spot, and I put all of my faith into this Navmesh. How did that work out for me? Fuck. I tried my best to salvage this situation, but he was stranded on the small ledge directly above the pit. I knew it was only a matter of time before the inevitable. Now I know how Nicolas Cage must have felt. I find it very funny that this was the fate of a pig I spent over 600 times resting at a bonfire to get. I knew of much safer routes to get him to the mushrooms, but he did good in confirming my suspicions with this risky Navmesh. Now you might be thinking, but illusory, why go that way at all? Instead of trusting the risky Navmesh and dropping onto that roof, we could just turn around and go this way. Then from here, it's just another short drop to the bottom. Nice and safe. But one small problem with this route is that they failed to include a Navmesh connecting these platforms, so the pig won't know how to follow you down there. I find it interesting that they forgot to put one here. In vanilla, it's less surprising that they forgot, because the original version of Tseldora had another zipline down here, which was the main intended way of getting down. In Scholar of the First Sin, they took that zipline away, making it a lot harder to figure out, and thus making the lower Brightstone Cove bonfire more of a secret that's easier to miss. You can see how this really was originally designed to make use of that now missing zipline. Dropping off of here is a little awkward, and it brings attention to how you can't fit through the spot, forcing you to go around it in a way that's not visually intuitive. And then the lack of a Navmesh here really shows how they didn't think about traveling down to this area on foot originally, due to previously having the zipline. But anyways, since the only real issue here is the lack of a Navmesh, there's nothing to stop you from knocking the pig down there, and once it's there, that's totally fine. Well, actually, from that platform, there's a couple different Navmeshes connecting to the very bottom. One that's completely safe, and one that looks horrible, leading into the pit. Thankfully, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the pig to use the one leading into the pit, so it doesn't seem to be a problem. Anyways, the easiest and safest route in my opinion is to go in a different direction entirely from the start, and just go down here. The Navmesh connecting down here doesn't have a gap, so it's unlikely to create any issues for the pig following you. The only thing you need to do is make sure you hug the wall to the left, as to not accidentally bait the pig into a charge attack that sends him into the pit. Then from here, you can just have the pig follow you through the building, and then there's just a couple more drops that aren't precarious or dangerous at all. As long as you do a good job of clearing enemies out of the way, and keep an eye on the pig to make sure he's keeping up with you, it's really not hard to get him to follow you through the level. But if you do go this way, you really do want to follow this specific path, and not go this way instead, despite also having proper Navmeshes. That's because there's a different issue here entirely, one where the draw groups will screw you over. We can think of Lower Tseldora as being split into essentially two halves, with this sort of bottlenecked area between them, connecting them. While it's a little more complicated than this, because you have side connecting paths that can transition a following enemy without issue, what it basically boils down to is that when you're in one half down here, the game doesn't want to think about rendering enemies who are in the other half. And it treats this connecting platform that's off of the ground as part of the back half of this area. What this means is that with the pig following us, when we drop to the ground level, it'll immediately de-render and stop following us. And while it's de-rendered, it halts the pig's AI, so it's worse than just being invisible for a moment. Now he's stuck there. We could try and go back around, but I had a hell of a time trying to get his attention, even with alluring skulls. It's not that he can't follow you this way. If we went back this way while he was still in pursuit, it would have been totally fine. There's a Navmesh connecting down here as well, but he lost his line of sight and got de-aggroed in the process of us trying to make it back around here from ground level, making it a problem. So that's all to say that this is one other route you don't want to mess with. One last thing worth mentioning is that some sloppiness with the Navmesh routing often causes the pig to fall into the spikes here. It's never resulted in the death of a pig for me. The damage of the spikes is pretty low, and every time they found their way back out quickly enough. But that could be a different story if you accidentally hit the pig earlier fighting other enemies. So this right here is a very good reason to get rid of enemies in advance. While I have even more weird pig facts to share in a moment, before we move on, I'd like to reflect on this whole pickaxe thing. You'll have people wondering, how the heck was anyone ever supposed to figure this out? This is the craziest secret ever. But was it really a crazy secret if the guidebook told us how to do it from day one? No. It still earns its notoriety for being a ridiculous task that would be nearly impossible to figure out, and having an additional 1 in 1,000 rare pig spawn is just plain weird. But without ever giving the community the chance to figure this out on their own, it never truly got to live as a secret. Which brings me to something else I've been meaning to talk about. None of the Souls games have ever had a major secret. This might sound like a funny thing to say, because to a player going in blind, From Software isn't the least bit shy about hiding major elements of their games behind illusory walls, areas that require some obtuse puzzle solving, having NPC questlines and events that are easy to miss, etc. That's also to say nothing of their breadcrumbs approach to lore, and the mysterious nature of these games permeating even their mechanics. Plus, there's also lots of Easter eggs and weird little odds and ends. There's a ton to discover in these games, and they provide truly excellent fodder for those 100 secrets you missed in Dark Souls kinds of videos. Did you know about the flaming poop attack? There's a flaming poop attack. Did you know you could deflect projectiles with force, including the giant's bombs? And so on. But with all of that in mind, major things like hidden areas, rare weapons or loot, or NPC interactions, all of that stuff has always been known about in these games at launch. Nothing along those lines has ever taken weeks or months to discover. One of my most popular videos is called How Was the Dark Souls DLC Discovered?, with the perhaps somewhat clickbaity thumbnail asking the question, how the fuck were you meant to find this? It's kind of funny to me that this is one of my best performing videos, but I get why this one resonated with viewers. A big reason for its success is that a lot of people come to these games well after their launch and don't really have a context for what kinds of things are discovered in them. Over the years, I've seen many threads on Reddit or YouTube comments asking things like, who was the first person to discover Ash Lake? It must have been crazy when someone found out you can go back to the asylum, etc. A big chunk of the view count is people sincerely wanting to know how the DLC was discovered, only for me to have to be the bearer of bad news and explain that it wasn't. So I'm here to reiterate that in today's video as well. Players on their own may get to find some of this stuff, but guidebooks spoil their existence for the broader community, and knowledge quickly spreads via word of mouth. The community never has a chance to unravel these kinds of things, and while I do think it's the responsibility of a guidebook to tell you about something like Ash Lake and how to get there, I do find myself wishing that a few more elaborate secrets were sprinkled into these games and weren't just explained on release. I have to give credit to Bluepoint for being the first to really give it a shot in the Demon's Souls remake, with the ridiculous quest for getting the Penetrator's armor set, which, if I remember correctly, took something like a week for players to figure out. That was neat. I think there was a missed opportunity to do the same with the pickaxe in Dark Souls 2. If it was never explained to the community, I think its discovery could have been a really cool thing to have happened. And I'm also fairly confident that, unlike the Penetrator's armor in the Demon's Souls remake, that it probably would have taken a long time to discover, possibly even years. Let's unravel what the hunt for the pickaxe probably would have looked like if it was a mystery. To start with, there's the notion that someone would have just figured it out, because pigs are known truffle hunters. While this is one possible avenue for its discovery, I'm gonna have to object to it in that I'm very skeptical that it would have been easy for anyone to figure out quickly. Once people know how to get the pickaxe, they can look at this event and understand what the developers were going for, but you have all of the benefit of hindsight there. What would this have looked like to players who didn't know there was a secret here at all? I believe the correct answer is nothing. Astute observers might recognize that the mushrooms are a unique asset, but I'm not sure how far that gets us. The broken fountain leading into the level is also a unique environmental asset that doesn't show up anywhere else. Some detail in the environment being unique isn't enough to tip us off that there's something special about it. This might make for a crude analogy, but you know how in old cartoons you'd often have animation cells that didn't neatly match the color of the background art? And how this would give away that there's something like a false wall or trap that's about to be interacted with, telegraphing its presence in advance to the viewer? I don't believe there's any kind of video game equivalent here to inform us that the mushrooms are special. They don't stand out from the rest of the environment, there's not like a skylight illuminating them, and there's certainly not anything like an interaction prompt to make us stop and take a closer look. So while I can't entirely rule out that someone might have just made a connection to the pigs and given it a shot, I just really don't think anyone would have paid attention to it. I believe our hunt for the pickaxe in this hypothetical alternate reality would have begun elsewhere. Through data mining, it would have been understood very early on that the pickaxe exists as a weapon you can use. While a deeper level of data mining would have eluded the player base for a while, lower hanging fruit would have come to us in the form of text and texture dumps. The community would have found both the item description and icon for the pickaxe very quickly, and then players using Cheat Engine would have figured out how to swap its weapon model in without much effort. So there wouldn't have been any doubt of its existence, but we wouldn't have yet known if it was a secret item or simply unused content. Dark Souls 1 had some items, complete with icons and item descriptions that worked perfectly if modded in, that were simply unused and didn't wind up being part of some super secret event, and we would have been wondering if the same was true for the pickaxe. But there was something of a hint given to us in Dark Souls 2 though, to at least bring us to the right area. While there's a few hollows in Tseldora also using a pickaxe, those are unique enemy models. What would have been much more tantalizing was this Red Phantom NPC. He uses the same pickaxe we're looking for, and he's found either just outside the mushroom building, or inside it, depending on which version of the game you're playing. And on top of all of this, he uses the porcine shield. His placement kind of near the mushrooms was definitely an intentional choice by the developers, meant to serve as a hint, but I wonder how much it would have initially helped. I believe the hunt for the pickaxe likely would have put too much focus on him, not in the right way. It's pretty much guaranteed that lots of people would have tried farming him, in hopes that he had it as an ultra-rare drop. And when that failed, I suspect people would have tried messing around with him in various ways. Kill him by luring him to the pit, or make him die to the damage spikes, etc. The fact that the pickaxe was real, and that this enemy had it, would have resulted in all sorts of experiments to get him to drop it. Just like how players came up with all sorts of wacky theories about what to do with the pendant in Dark Souls 1. Would his shield have helped give it away? Maybe. But Dark Souls 2 really stepped things up with having invaders and summons that started to feel a bit more like real players, and with that comes silly builds, so I don't know if anyone would have found the shield special. It's not like you get the shield from anywhere nearby as well, it just feels like a random shield that exists in this universe. But nonetheless, these were hints that started to pile up, and I do think we had one last hope for tying this all together: the rare pig. If someone noticed that an extremely rare pig sometimes spawned in the level, and someone connected the dots to all of the conspiracy theories that probably would have cropped up in trying to spawn the pickaxe, I think this was our best avenue for learning about it without further data mining. But I see a small problem here. How long would it have taken for someone to discover the rare pig? Something kind of funny about me making a big deal out of finally documenting this thing is that thousands of people have already seen it. A 1 in 1,000 spawn chance means it's extremely rare for any individual player to encounter, but for a game that sold a few million copies, that's a lot of opportunities to roll that dice. Which might sound like a good thing for its discoverability, but I think it makes the case for the opposite. This demonstrates that the overwhelming majority of players who see the pig won't know it's anything special. Even if someone wondered, weren't these pigs bigger? There's a realistic possibility that it could have been conflated for another change in pig size that already exists in the game. I could see someone disregarding it as a bug relating to how the pigs change size in Majula. So while observations of all these things could have added up to discovering the pickaxe without further data mining, it's not at all a guarantee that it would have happened. The rare pig being discovered would have required more than just a few players seeing it. I do, however, believe that the discovery of the pickaxe was basically inevitable, and that it wouldn't have lasted a secret until today or anything. If it wasn't solved organically with all of the available clues so far, a deeper wave of data mining likely would have led to it eventually. For example, Hot Pocket Remix found a comment in the code that says, "Has the pig started to eat mushrooms?" That's something of a smoking gun, But before you start thinking that this was easy and that data mining makes it impossible for secrets to hide, something to bear in mind is that this comment was in an ESD file. I'm not remotely qualified to elaborate on what this is, but it's apparently a weird custom format that used state machines for events. This was not something that was going to be found easily or quickly. I asked Hot Pocket Remix for his perspective on the history of Dark Souls II data mining, and here was his initial impression on the pickaxe's discoverability. I think my conclusion would be, if we imagine a world where A, the guide doesn't tell us about it, B, it's assumed to be cut content, and C, nobody tries the pig thing by accident for kicks, it would eventually be discovered via data mining, probably around 2019 to 2020. That's when ESD started to be understood. That wasn't the only angle of approach for finding it. Moonlight Ruin mentioned that he thinks someone would have eventually noticed the invisible object with a deactivated item lot attached to it, the thing that's interacted with to actually spawn the pickaxe. But he also said, funny enough, old versions of the map editor didn't render those objects, and also crashed when loading Tseldora too. So this is another toolset that took a bunch of years to develop to the point of being able to help uncover the pickaxe. So when I said that this might have stayed hidden for years, I wasn't kidding. I'll throw a much more detailed review of what data mining to discover the pickaxe might have looked like up on the screen. You can pause if you'd like to read it, but I think it's worth talking instead about how gaming communities sometimes have a somewhat naive outlook on data mining, where it's just assumed people can look at the game code and quickly uncover all of its secrets. But that doesn't take into account what happens when a game uses a lot of proprietary formats and has to undergo a lot of complicated reverse engineering. Did you know that we don't know what the Soulsborne and Elden Ring game engine is even called? It's nicknamed Dandelion by the community, and there's an excellent write-up on the Souls modding wiki that does its best to unpack all of this. Shout out to the author, TKGP, because it's a genuinely fun read. Anyways, the most relevant bit in here to stress is this part. Dandelion is an entirely proprietary engine developed by and for From Software. Although it typically makes use of common middleware such as Havok, Fmod, or Bink, the vast majority of its systems and formats are custom-made, undocumented, and unsupported in any existing software. Given that, almost all modding tools used for From games are the product of reverse engineering and implementation from scratch by the community. With all this in mind, it's amazing that Souls modding has come along as far as it has, and it should serve as a helpful clarification on why it takes effort to pick these games apart. So, why was this in the game at all? Now, I know some of you just wanted more pig facts, and this video has already gone off the rails with speculation about the pickaxe quest, but I've got one last tangent to go down here. Its inclusion in the game is fascinating to me, and if there was ever a time to host this discussion and share my thoughts on it, that time is now. And I've got some conspiracy theories about the porcine shield for you, so I guess we're still sort of on topic. That's a pig thing. While I lump the pickaxe in with everything else that gets explained by official guidebooks, it deserves recognition for being unique. Explained from the outset or not, it's still the weirdest secret item put into one of these games, and not counting the Penetrator armor set from the Demon's Souls remake, because that wasn't From Software, there really isn't a close second place. Maybe it's because it was the first Souls game from a different director, or they just wanted to do something different for the sake of it, but why did they bother? I think it's possible that their inspiration for this might have been a reaction to the community. They had a budding fandom in the West that started dissecting their games at an unprecedented level with their newfound popularity. But let's set the stage with the porcine shield, as there's an interesting reason why it's in the game at all. Dark Souls 2 had a shield design contest, where the community would come up with shield designs and a few select winners would wind up in the game. This is actually something that goes further back. Dark Souls 1 had a shield design contest as well. I'll throw the winners up on the screen for a moment. But Dark Souls 2 had one, and these were the winners. Note that the porcine shield isn't in there, but it was one of the entries from the same contest. While From Software was going to handpick their favorites out of a broader top 90 winners, combing through 30 from the US, Europe, and Asia each, the porcine shield took first place in the initial community vote in a landslide, due to being a reference to Epic Namebro, an extremely prominent voice in the Souls community back in the day. It didn't seem to be slated as a winner to actually wind up in the game, winning a separate category called Selected by Community, where the winners were given a consolation prize of winning free copies of a special edition of Dark Souls 2. I remember being fond of the Tally Shield, and it might have gotten my vote for the Great Shields at the time, but maybe this Liberty or Death Eagle should have won. Anyways, you can see that the submission for the porcine shield was originally quite different. A different design entirely on a Great Shield. But it left the contest in a bit of controversy when it was figured out that the pig head drawn onto the template was a traceover of a stock image and not fully original artwork. However, changing the shield's design to something new and original seemed to be From Software's way of salvaging it, and there's what seems to be a meta reference to the shield design contest in its item description. It says, "A strangely porcine shield. The pig head looks eerily authentic, but it is an imitation." An imitation? Are they talking about the traceover? So the shield is in the game because of the community and seems to reference a community event. And while this is something that's already been talked about and is understood, I want to take this a step further. Why is the pickaxe hidden the way it is in Dark Souls 2? This conjecture is entirely my own, and it's not something he's ever tried taking credit for, but I think it's From Software's reaction to extremely analytical fans, including Epic Namebro in particular. If you weren't around at the time and aren't familiar with him, I should stress how back when Dark Souls 1 was brand new, we didn't yet have a lot of people doing a deeper analysis of the game's lore and mechanics. There was something of a first wave of people starting to dig into these kinds of things and make YouTube videos about it, and Epic Namebro was at the epicenter of this emerging scene. He quickly became one of the most prominent voices in the Souls fanbase, and was eventually hired to work on the guidebooks for Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne. And he even got to have a meeting with Miyazaki at some point. I guess that's the quick summary if you're newer to these games and don't have this context, but the point is that he was one of the most important Souls content creators early on, and his contributions are something that were widely recognized and valued. You could think of him as an early gateway to helping a lot of players have their minds blown by Dark Souls. With all of that in mind, let's take another look at the main hint that's meant to help us puzzle out the pickaxe. This NPC is wielding the pickaxe, and his porcine shield is meant to help us understand that a pig is involved. But I have a hard time looking at this in isolation. The reason the shield exists is because it's a reference to Epic Namebro, but now that it's in the game, am I supposed to believe that there's no further connection? That a shield that represents someone who deeply analyzed these games would require its own theory crafting and analysis to solve a puzzle it's involved with? It makes me suspect it's not a coincidence. It's a shield that honors digging into these games, asking the player to do some more digging. Who knows, maybe an interview with the developers will one day reveal a completely different reason for why the pickaxe was hidden the way it was, but if I'm on the right track at all, it makes sense that Dark Souls 2 would be the right time and place for this sort of thing. Now it's simply understood that these games will be overanalyzed, but that was not a foregone conclusion in their earlier years. Dark Souls 2 would have been their first Souls title where they really understood the certainty of having a large, deeply analytical fanbase, and I believe that the pig escort mission was probably put in to just throw a bone at the kinds of players who tend to overanalyze things. So let's finally talk about some other pig fun facts. In Scholar of the Fursin, if you despawn the small pig's Majula by killing all of them 12 times, 2 larger boars will show up. If you despawn those by killing them another 12 times, you unlock a giant boar mini-boss of sorts, which can only be killed once without the use of ascetics. So there's a secret mini-boss in Majula that most players don't know about, though this whole thing is unique to Scholar and can't be found in the original version of the game, so I just find it funny that they decided to expand on some pig weirdness in the re-release. I think with hindsight, they knew that players were going to farm the smaller pigs out of existence trying to collect red-eye orbs, so this was just a silly way of messing with the player base. And you do get a small reward related to that grind, a guaranteed drop of 3 cracked red-eye orbs. At Bonfire Intensity 2 in Tseldora, achieved by entering New Game Plus or using a Bonfire Ascetic, a couple more of these giant boar mini-bosses show up. They also only spawn once per playthrough or Bonfire Intensity, but this time they have Divine Blessings as a guaranteed drop. Thankfully, these giant boars are extras and don't replace the regular boars. This is extremely helpful if you haven't already gotten the pickaxe, because unfortunately, the giant boars can't also dig it up for you. Part of me was really hoping it would work with them too, but there's a couple obstacles in the way of getting them to even follow you that far. They have a much shorter leash distance of 60 meters. That wouldn't be far enough to get you to the mushroom. In fact, they won't even follow you all the way down this hill, not even making it to the cave area. But even if they could follow you further, we assumed that the small doorway before the prowling magus would be as far as they could go. But it turns out they wouldn't be able to make it even this far. There's another invisible enemy wall here I didn't mention in my previous video. The giant boars can't pass through it. So it's not just the cliffside enemy wall that the small and regular pigs ignore, there's another one here too that they had to consider. I'd understand if they made a type of invisible wall that only blocked NPCs and not all regular enemies, but that's not what's happening here. This one has the same hit filter ID as the one by the cliff, confirming that it does block more enemies than just Cromwell. With the giant boars also blocked, This means they almost certainly did have to think about how these smaller pigs, specifically, are still allowed through. And now, let's talk about Elana. This boss is able to summon help throughout the fight. She's able to spawn a group of skeletons, Velstadt, or 3 small pigs. And they also have a unique appearance here. It's a sort of dull gold texture you won't see anywhere else. But most players haven't seen her summon the pigs before, so this is another one of those weird little details that a lot of people don't know about. There's no real reason to it beyond just having a funny thing show up during the fight. Once again, invoking pigs for an Easter egg. Now, I've heard the pigs being summoned described as a rare event, but I never knew what to make of that. When the DLC first came out, I remember seeing her summon the pigs at least a couple of times pretty quickly. So when everyone else talked about it being rare, I assumed it was being a little exaggerated. I figured it might have just been a less common summon, as something like a 1 in 10 spawn chance could explain why I didn't have a hard time seeing them, but why a lot of players would still miss them. Wanting to get to the bottom of this, I once again enlisted the help of Hot Pocket Remix. With his data mining and a lot of testing and debug from my end, I think we've finally gotten it nailed down. Well enough, at least. My original hunch turned out to be completely wrong. Everyone else was right. It is rare. I just got very lucky, and that threw my expectations way off. An order of magnitude off. By default, the pigs have a 1% spawn chance. Velstadt has a 30% spawn chance, and the skeletons have a 69% chance. Huh. Who would have guessed that the skeletons were the real pigs all along? While a 1 in 100 chance might not be the same thing as 1 in 1,000, and certainly a lot more people have seen Elana's pigs than the rare Tseldora pig, I think that trying to see it on purpose, without knowing more about how it works, could take just as much effort. We're not able to spam rusting out a bonfire, we'd actually have to spend a lot of time fighting off enemies and waiting for Elana to summon. But while I'm happy to finally have some concrete info on the spawn chances of Elana's summons, there's more to how this works, and I noticed that there seems to be a lot of confusion about it. I've seen some common wisdom that keeping a previous summon alive will stop the next summon from showing up, which is not really true. She can summon 2 groups at once. Even the Wikidoc gets this wrong, and in an uncharacteristically Fextra-Life-like move, when people noticed differently, instead of just removing the incorrect information, they piled on a list of disagreeing reports. But even one of them doubted themselves and assumed it must have been a bug, when that's just how the game works. And then there's also some weird stuff going on, like co-op summons decreasing the chances for the skeletons, while buffing the chances for Velstadt. But I'm not sure you'll find mention of that aspect on the wikis. Ironing out exactly how all of this works wound up being a pretty huge rabbit hole of its own. By the time this video is up, I'll probably have written a more thorough explanation somewhere, but to not go too far down this tangent in today's video, I just want to talk about stacking the odds in favor of the pigs. Can we do something to improve their 1% spawn chance? We can, by allowing Elana to summon the skeletons first. As long as we keep one of the skeletons alive, they'll be taken out of the lineup for what can be summoned next. And then the odds are readjusted so that the pigs have a 1 in 30 chance of being summoned against Velstadt's 29 out of 30 chance. Velstadt is still a lot more likely, but hey, 1 in 30. A little over 3 times better than where we started. But while this looks like a major improvement, there's a catch. If you just kill all of her summons right away so 2 groups don't pile up at once, giving the pigs their normal 1% spawn chance, Elana will continue to summon more enemies roughly every single minute or so, on average. But when she already has a summon present that you've kept alive, the amount of time it takes for her to spawn her second summon is roughly 3.33 minutes, on average. So we just traded one variable for another. We increased the pig's spawn chance while reducing the frequency of summoning events, in such a manner where the benefits cancel each other out almost perfectly. There's no clear winner here. In fact, the biggest pros and cons to each method now have nothing to do with the likelihood of running into the pigs, and is now entirely on whether you prefer an easier set of fights, or not needing as many repair powders. But thankfully, that's all kind of moot because there is something else we can do. What if I told you that we could trick the game into giving the pigs a 75% spawn chance? But of course, there's also a catch to this, and it also kind of sucks. You'll want Elana to summon both the skeletons and Velstadt. We only need to keep one of the skeletons alive, but we need that skeleton and Velstadt around. And after whoever shows up second, we'll need to wait an additional 4 minutes. So we'd want to dodge Elana, a skeleton, and Velstadt for 4 minutes straight. Fun. Once we've done that, we have really good odds of getting the pigs. But it's weird. Elana can only summon 2 groups at a time, and there shouldn't be anything to guarantee the pigs. Because if we have to do something like kill Velstadt for something else to be summoned, Velstadt is going to be put right back into the lineup, and now we're back to square one. Except, Not necessarily. It turns out that there's a glitch, where if we can get Elana to do her summoning move very quickly after killing one of her summons off, she will do her summoning faster than the game understands that the enemy we just killed went away. In other words, there's two different things here wanting to know if the enemy is still alive, and they're not perfectly synced up. Killing one of these enemies allows her to finally summon something else, but at the same time that she does that, the game might still think that that enemy is there. Step aside, Schrodinger's cat. It's time for Schrodinger's Velstadt. This is what allows the game to think that the pigs are the only thing that can be summoned. Now, this all falls apart if we can't get Elana to do her summoning move right after killing the second summon off. But thankfully, it's not that hard to get Elana to do it right away. Summoning is actually the very first thing on her attack list in her AI, so anytime she finishes an attack, she will always try to summon if she's able to. But if she always defaults to trying to summon first, why doesn't she do it all the time? It's because she uses a set of timers that block it as an option. And even once it's re-enabled, it's only given a randomized chance. So when I said that she will always try to summon if she's able to, what I actually mean is that she will roll the dice to decide if she summons. I realize this is getting pretty messy pretty quickly, but if you're still following along, this explains why we have to wait 4 minutes. If we wait just 2.5 minutes, she only has a 20% chance of triggering a summon whenever she tries to. But at the 4-minute mark, the odds increase and cap at 75%. This is where those odds come from. If we're fast enough, the pigs are the only thing in the lineup, so there's a 100% chance that the pigs are the only thing that can be selected. But there's only a 75% chance that Elana will actually do the summoning move. The sensitive timing involved also means that we would have to time when we kill off the enemy, because if we time it poorly, so that Elana still has to finish a long attack, it doesn't matter if we land that 75% chance on the first try. Again, anything that slows this process down too much results in Velstadt or the skeletons winding back up in the lineup. But still, as absurd as this all sounds, now that we know how to do it, gaming the system so that you're very likely to see or summon the pigs is entirely possible and not that hard. We've completely turned things around from the 1% spawn chance. You're just gonna have to spend 4 minutes dodging this. Perhaps a bunch of times, until you get the timing right. Lastly, I have an extremely cursed thought to consider regarding the rare Tseldora pig. Because you can farm most enemies out of existence by killing them 12 times, players sometimes like to do a clear Drangleic run. There's a small handful of enemies you can't permanently despawn, but the idea is to make the world as empty as you possibly can before finishing the game. I think you see where this is going. This little guy might have just invalidated all those runs, because he works the same way. I hope you didn't think that his 1 in 1,000 spawn chance made him exempt. It still keeps count of how many times he's died, so you need to kill him 12 times to truly depopulate Tseldora. Now of course, challenge runs and gimmick runs are just something we do for fun. There's no rules, and if we wanted to explore Drangleic with the least amount of living things encountered possible, we could just use one of the times the small pig doesn't show up to satisfy that requirement. To actually permanently despawn the little guy would take an absurd amount of effort, so finding a way to carve out an exception for him is completely reasonable. But still, knowing that most people doing this run probably weren't thinking of him, that there was one more enemy that could still show up, that'll probably be annoying news to at least a couple people out there. If you want to fully despawn everything you can in Dark Souls 2, that sort of run, on average, would involve resting at the Tseldora bonfire roughly 12,000 times. It's a very funny consideration that doesn't seem to usually show up in discussions about clear Drangleic runs. Pretty late into the process of editing this video, I've come to learn of 2 previous documentations of the rare pig. Part of me assumed that there's probably already a Let's Play or Twitch VOD out there that includes it, and that maybe even someone knew what it was and properly captured it, but that I had just come up short in searching for it. It makes the start of the video a bit cheesier, the whole I'm gonna show you something I've never seen screenshots or video of before part. I wasn't trying to be purposefully weaselly with my wording. I don't want you to think I was purposefully ignoring these things to inflate the hype. But choosing between restructuring the video or maintaining my journey of excitement and finally seeing the pigs for myself, I decided to not edit them earlier into the video and present what I was originally going to share, because everything about how it was shrouded in mystery for me personally was true. But that being said, I always like to give credit where I can, and these earlier sightings deserve recognition. I found a thread on GameFAQs that mentioned a previous user who had found the pig, and armed with a URL to search for, I found the source, Starfighter Procs on Reddit. I feel a little vindicated in not having seen this before. While it was posted to GameFAQs and Reddit, it only got a little over 100 views, so it's not like it made a huge splash. But nonetheless, Starfighter Procs deserves all the credit for being the first to document it. And I love seeing these blurry photographs of a TV screen. You have to remember that consoles at the time didn't have built-in screenshotting or recording capabilities. That's a trend that started in the next generation of consoles, one that I'm very thankful for and hope never goes away. There also wasn't as big of an industry of streamers and YouTubers documenting full playthroughs on consoles. Of course, some people had capture cards, but they weren't exactly a common household item. This meant that anytime someone saw something rare in a Souls game, a lot of the best evidence we'd have would be these really horrible photos that looked like cryptid sightings. It's how I started off confirming some of this stuff. I'd take similar pictures myself. So I don't feel totally stupid for having missed this, as not many people saw it and it didn't seem to get linked around a lot. There's only going to be an egg on my face if something with a lot more views shared the pig sighting before me.
So this is a one-of-a-kind piece. There's no other one like this particular one in the world. Oh, shit.
I was beaten to the punch by a Vidya only, over 10 years ago. And it's not like people didn't see that. Man, even Iron Pineapple is in the comments talking about it. It feels like everyone already saw it, and maybe I'm just the one who missed out. I love seeing his presentation of it. He recorded his narration before actually finding it, so you can hear the uncertainty in his voice when talking about it.
This next one is a bonus thing for this video because I'm narrating it now before I've actually even recorded it. That's because it's the rarest event in a Souls game, and I can't guarantee that I'll even be able to record it.
That uncertainty pretty much sums up how difficult it was to find concrete information about it. I'm sure that neither Vadi nor Starfighter Prox knew of the strategy of keeping the regular boars alive to watch them despawn, nor the exact starting location of the rare pig. So I suspect that they had an even harder time of it than I did, unless they got very lucky. I guess that pretty much wraps things up. Maybe it was funny to make this whole video and not even really talk about the pickaxe itself, or the Pickaxe as I was apparently supposed to call it. By all accounts, it's a bad weapon at worst, and a mid-weapon at best. I don't know. I don't really have anything to say about it. All of its intrigue is in how it's hidden. No one actually cares about the pickaxe itself. I enjoy collecting it, but I haven't used it for more than a couple minutes, and I probably never will. To close out the video, I'm going to let the unedited footage of getting the pig to spawn in Scholar of the First Sin to play in full. Part of me was considering padding out the extended episode length with some bonus content, maybe a mini podcast about my reaction to Elden Ring Night Rain or whatever, but I think that to really drive home the absurdity of what grinding for the pig looks and feels like, I should just let it play out in awkward silence. It's only a 12-minute clip, and you'll just have to take my word for it that it was authentic and unmodded. The only reason I didn't document the whole process is because I was capturing video in 4K and would stop and delete whatever I recorded every 15 minutes or so, as to not pile up huge video files. So I can't prove that this was the end of an hours-long process, but it was. I'd like to thank Moonlight Ruin, Hot Pocket Remix, and Evan Halfgrown Hollow for data mining and modding assistance. And once again, Lord Radai for help with their DebugManager mod, which was used heavily in making this video. If you'd like to support this channel, please consider doing all of the engagement things that help. You can also support me directly on Patreon, that's patreon.com/illusorywall. And extra special thanks to all of my backers at the Evil Vagrant tier. Aronar, Basileus, Europa, Gary Marshall, Inciaratable, Jack Gerhart, Kakaruma, Kiko Abad, Chris, Lazy Tangent, Matt, Ronax, the Majalis Duo, and Zelther. Thanks so much, and thanks again for watching. There'll be more Dark Souls 2 on the way soon. Holy shit, I think I got it. Oh, there it is. There it is. Holy shit. Okay, so he does aggro against you. Oh man, that's incredible. Oh, it only took a few hours of grinding. This feels kind of like seeing a good vagrant or something. Goodbye.